The last guardian lunged at him, its spectral form glowing brightly. Torian met its charge heat-in, his blade colliding with the figure in a brilliant clash of light and energy. The guardian dissolved, its remnants carried away by the wind. The vortex calmed, and the path ahead opened once more. Torian placed a hand on Skarn's shoulder, drawing strength from the beast's unwavering presence. "We're not stopping," he said. "Not now." The second ascent. The bridge of shadows, the next section of the climb, brought them to a narrow ledge that overlooked a deep chasm. A bridge of black stone stretched across the gap, its surface cracked and uneven. The air here was heavy, the shadows deep and suffocating. Torian hesitated at the edge of the bridge, the ember within him pulsing faintly. "This doesn't feel right," he said softly. Skarn growled, its golden eyes fixed on the bridge. The beast's body was low to the ground, its claws digging into the frozen earth. As they stepped onto the bridge, the shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and coiling like living creatures. The darkness thickened, obscuring the far side of the chasm. Torian's blade flared, its fiery veins casting a faint light that pushed back the shadows. The first tendril struck without warning, lashing out from the darkness with terrifying speed. Torian dodged, his blade slicing through the shadowy appendage and dispersing it into wisps of smoke. But more tendrils emerged, their movements erratic and relentless. "Keep moving," Torian shouted, his voice echoing across the chasm. Skarn roared, leaping onto the bridge and swiping at the tendrils with its powerful claws. The beast's strikes were precise, each one scattering the shadows that tried to ensnare them. The bridge began to crack beneath their feet, the shadows pressing down with an almost tangible weight. Torian focused on the ember's warmth, drawing its energy into his blade. The fiery veins burned brighter, their light cutting through the darkness and steadying his steps. As they neared the center of the bridge, the shadows coalesced into a massive figure, a towering, humanoid form with eyes like smoldering embers. Its voice was deep and resonant, echoing across the chasm. "You do not belong here," it said, its tone heavy with disdain. "Turn back or be consumed." Torian raised his blade, its light flaring defiantly. "I've heard that before," he said, "but I'm not stopping." The shadow giant roared, its massive arms swinging down with crushing force. Torian dodged, the impact shattering the stone where he had stood moments before. He countered with a swift strike, his blade cutting through the giant's arm and dispersing it into smoke. Skarn leapt at the figure, its claws raking across its chest. The giant staggered, but quickly recovered, its shadowy form reforming. Torian pressed the attack, his strikes precise and deliberate as he channeled the ember's energy into his blade. The battle was fierce, the shadows threatening to overwhelm them. But Torian and Skarn fought with unrelenting determination, their combined strength forcing the giant back. With a final, powerful strike, Torian drove his blade into the figure's chest, the fiery energy searing through its core. The shadow giant let out a roar of pain before collapsing into smoke. The darkness lifted, and the far side of the bridge became visible. The path beyond was clear. The summit, the final ascent, was the steepest and most grueling yet. The path was lined with jagged rocks and slick with ice, each step a battle against exhaustion and the biting cold. The rhythmic pulse of energy grew stronger, resonating in time with Torian's heartbeat. At last, they reached the summit, a wide plateau bathed in a strange golden light. At its center stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with intricate runes that glowed faintly. The air was thick with energy, the very atmosphere vibrating with power. Torian approached cautiously, his blade glowing faintly in his grasp. Skarn stood beside him, its body tense and ready. As they reached the altar, the light flared brightly, and a figure began to materialize. It was humanoid but larger than life, its form wreathed in swirling energy. Its eyes burned like twin stars, and its voice was deep and resonant as it spoke. "You have traversed the trials of the valley and the mountain," the figure said, But to claim the power of the peak, you must face the truth of your own strength. Torian straightened, his grip on his blade firm. "I'm ready," he said. The figure extended a hand, and the altar began to glow, its runes flaring as the air around them erupted into chaos. Beams of light and shadow shot toward Torian and Skarn, forcing them to move quickly as the final trial began. Chapter 26. The gathering storm, the descent from the mountain, was shrouded in an eerie silence, the wind carrying faint whispers that rose and fell like the voices of restless spirits. Torian walked with purpose, his blade sheathed but glowing faintly, the fiery veins along its surface responding to the energy of the shard now pulsing within him. Beside him, Skarn moved with a steady gait, its iron-like body glinting in the soft, golden light of the dawn creeping over the horizon. Below, the world stretched out in a patchwork of rolling hills, dense forests, and barren wastelands. Far to the east, a dark cloud loomed, a storm that seemed alive, churning with ominous energy. The Shadowlands, Malvorn's domain, lay beyond, and the storm served as a barrier, a warning to those who dared approach. "This is the calm before the storm," Torian murmured, his voice almost lost in the wind. He placed a hand on Skarn's shoulder, drawing strength from the beast's unwavering presence. "We're close, but we'll need all the help we can get." Skarn growled softly in agreement, its golden eyes scanning the horizon. The beast's instincts had been sharpened by their trials, its movements deliberate and cautious. The Valley of Ashes, their path took them through a narrow valley, its walls carved from dark, volcanic rock. The ground was littered with the remnants of a long-forgotten battle, broken weapons, shattered armor, and the skeletal remains of warriors who had fallen centuries ago. The air was heavy with the scent of ash and sulfur, and the faint hum of dormant magic lingered like a ghost. Torian paused, his gaze lingering on a shattered sword half buried in the ground. Its blade was blackened and worn, but faint runes still glimmered along its edge. He knelt, brushing away the dirt to reveal more of the weapon. "This was no ordinary battle," he said, his voice thoughtful. "These were warriors of the old kingdoms. They fought with everything they had, but it wasn't enough." Skarn sniffed the air, its growl deepening as it stepped closer to Torian. The beast's body tensed, its claws scraping against the rocky ground. Torian stood, his blade glowing faintly as he drew it. The ember in his chest flared, warning him of a presence nearby. "We're not alone." The ground beneath their feet trembled, and from the shadows emerged figures cloaked in tattered armor, their skeletal forms animated by a dark energy. Their hollow eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and each one wielded a rusted weapon that seemed to hum with malevolence. "The Ashbound. They've been waiting here," Torian muttered, raising his blade as the first of the creatures advanced. "Bound to this place, waiting for someone to cross their path." The Ashbound moved as one, their strikes precise and unrelenting. Torian met the first attack with a parry, the clash of blades ringing out like a bell. The fiery veins along his blade flared as he countered, slicing through the skeletal figure's torso. It collapsed into a pile of ash and bone, but two more stepped forward to take its place. Skarn leapt into the fray, its claws tearing through the Ashbound with brutal efficiency. The beast's roars echoed through the valley, its golden eyes burning with resolve. Torian moved with precision, each strike of his blade fueled by the ember's steady rhythm. The battle raged on, the Ashbound seemingly endless. Torian's movements became a blur of fire and steel, his strikes carving through the relentless tide of enemies. Skarn fought at his side, their bond unshaken as they pushed forward. Finally, the last of the Ashbound fell, its form disintegrating into ash that was carried away by the wind. The valley grew silent once more, the oppressive energy fading as the remnants of the battle were claimed by time. Torian lowered his blade, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "This place is a graveyard," he said softly, glancing at the skeletal remains scattered across the ground. "But not just for the dead." Skarn nudged his side, its golden eyes filled with quiet understanding. Torian placed a hand on the beast's shoulder, drawing comfort from its presence. The gathering allies as they emerged from the valley, the landscape opened into a wide expanse of rolling plains dotted with ancient ruins and towering monoliths. The air was fresher here, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and earth, but the storm on the horizon loomed closer, its energy palpable even from this distance. Torian stopped at the base of a ruined watchtower, its crumbling walls overgrown with moss and vines. He placed his hand against the stone, feeling the faint pulse of dormant magic within. This was a stronghold once, he said, his voice thoughtful. A place of refuge. Maybe it still can be. From his satchel, Torian withdrew the shards he had collected, the ember of fire, the orb of shadow, and the fragment of light. He held them in his hands, their energies resonating as they pulsed in unison. "Guide me," he whispered, his voice steady. The shards flared brightly, their light casting long shadows across the plains. Slowly, figures began to materialize in the glow. Ethereal beings formed from fire, storm, and shadow. The Flameborn emerged first, its fiery presence radiating warmth and strength. Beside it appeared the Keeper of the Storm, its body crackling with energy, its eyes glowing with the intensity of the storm. Finally, the shadowy guardian of the labyrinth took shape, its form quiet but commanding. "You have called us," the Flameborn said, its voice steady. "What do you seek, Torian?" "Malvorn's forces are gathering," Torian said, his tone resolute. "We're going to need everything we have to face him. I need your help, not just your power, but your wisdom." The Keeper of the Storm stepped forward, its energy crackling softly. "The storm grows restless," it said. "Malvorn's strength lies not just in his power, but in the fear he sows. You must stand firm." The Labyrinth Guardian's voice was a whisper, carried on the wind. "Balance is your greatest weapon, Torian. Do not let the fire within you burn uncontrolled. Light and shadow must walk beside it." Torian nodded, his gaze steady. "Then tell me how to win." The three figures exchanged glances, their energies intertwining briefly before separating again. The Flameborn spoke first. "To face Malvorn, you must strike at his heart. The Shadowlands are his domain, but they also hold his weakness. Look for the light within the darkness." The Keeper of the Storm added, "The storm will rage against you, but remember, every storm breaks. Stand as the unyielding stone, and you will prevail." "And remember," the Labyrinth Guardian said, its voice quiet but firm, "the shadows within you are not your enemy. Embrace them, and they will guide you." The figures began to fade, their light dimming as their final words echoed across the plains. "We will stand with you, Torian. When the time comes, call upon us." Torian lowered the shards, their light fading as he placed them back into his satchel. He glanced at Skarn, who stood silently beside him, its golden eyes filled with determination. "Let's go," Torian said, his voice steady. "The Shadowlands are waiting." Together, they pressed onward, the storm on the horizon drawing closer with every step. The final battle loomed, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. Chapter 27. The gathering tempest, the aftermath of the labyrinth's trials lingered in the air like the residue of a storm. Torian and Skarn walked along a cracked and shimmering plain that stretched endlessly before them. The terrain pulsed faintly beneath their boots, veins of glowing energy crisscrossing the ground as though the earth itself were alive. Above them, the sky churned with roiling clouds, flickering with bursts of lightning that briefly illuminated the desolate expanse. The distant sound of thunder rumbled, deep and foreboding. Skarn padded silently at Torian's side, its iron-like body reflecting flashes of light from the tempest overhead. The beast's golden eyes scanned the horizon, alert for movement, its muscles tensed, its steps deliberate, as if it, too, could sense the danger ahead. "This storm isn't just weather," Torian muttered, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. He tightened his grip on his blade, the fiery veins along its surface pulsing faintly. The ember within his chest throbbed in unison, a steady rhythm that kept him grounded. It feels alive. The valley opened into a narrow gorge where jagged rocks jutted from the ground like ancient teeth. The wind grew stronger here, swirling around them and carrying whispers that barely rose above the howl of the storm. The words were unintelligible, fragmented murmurs that seemed to slip through the cracks of reality. Skarn growled low, its ears flicking back as it turned toward the mouth of the gorge. Torian followed its gaze, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. The whispers grew louder, mingling with the wind, until they seemed to coalesce into a single voice. "You tread on forbidden ground, Torian," the voice hissed, smooth and venomous. "Turn back, and I may yet allow you to leave with your life." Torian's pulse quickened, but he refused to waver. He raised his blade, its fiery veins flaring as he channeled the ember's power. "I've come too far to turn back now," he said, his voice steady. "Show yourself." The storm responded to his defiance. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the gorge in stark, blinding light. When the thunder faded, a figure stood at the far end of the gorge, silhouetted against the storm. It was sleek and feline, its elongated limbs and whip-like tail giving it an unnerving grace. Its eyes glowed like molten embers, burning with intelligence and malice. Karnas. The Shadow Stalker stepped forward, each movement deliberate and fluid. The storm seemed to part around it, the wind bending to its presence. "Torian," it said, its voice carrying effortlessly over the howling gale. "I warned you before. This path only leads to death." "And I told you I'm not afraid of you," Torian replied, his grip on his blade unwavering. Karnas chuckled, the sound low and predatory. "Not afraid? Or just too stubborn to see the truth? Malvorn's power is beyond anything you can comprehend. You're nothing but a pawn in a game you can't win." Skarn growled, stepping forward to place itself between Torian and Karnas. The beast's claws scraped against the rocky ground, its golden eyes fixed on the Shadow Stalker. Karnas regarded Skarn with mild amusement, tilting its head as if studying the creature. "Your pet has spirit," Karnas said, "but it won't save you." Before Torian could respond, Karnas struck. The Shadow Stalker moved with blinding speed, a blur of motion that closed the distance between them in an instant. Torian barely managed to raise his blade in time to deflect the first strike, the clash of steel and shadow sending sparks flying. Karnas's claws raked across his guard, their edges sharp enough to leave grooves in the tempered metal. Skarn lunged, its powerful frame colliding with Karnas in a burst of energy. The two creatures tumbled across the ground, claws and teeth flashing as they fought. Karnas moved with liquid grace, dodging Skarn's strikes and countering with devastating precision. But Skarn was relentless, its roars echoing through the gorge as it pressed the attack. Torian took advantage of the distraction, channeling the ember's energy into his blade. The fiery veins glowed brighter, their light cutting through the storm's gloom. He surged forward, his movements quick and deliberate, aiming for Karnas's exposed flank. The Shadow Stalker twisted, its molten eyes narrowing as it dodged his strike. Its tail lashed out, catching Torian across the chest and sending him stumbling back. The force of the blow left him winded, but he recovered quickly, the ember's warmth steadying him. "You're stronger than I expected," Karnas said, its voice almost approving. "But strength alone won't save you." Karnas leapt into the air, its claws glowing with dark energy as it descended toward Torian. He raised his blade, the fiery energy surging as he met the attack head-on. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the gorge, the ground cracking beneath their feet. The battle became a blur of motion, each strike and counterstrike faster than the last. Karnas fought with an eerie elegance, its movements precise and calculated. But Torian matched its speed, his blade cutting through the shadowy energy that surrounded it. The ember within him burned hotter, fueling his resolve as he pressed the attack. Skarn rejoined the fray, its claws raking across Karnas's side and forcing the Shadow Stalker to retreat. Karnas hissed, its molten eyes narrowing as it regarded them both. "This isn't over," Karnas said, its voice cold and venomous. "You may have survived this time, but Malvorn's shadow is eternal. You will fall, Torian." With a final, lingering glare, Karnas dissolved into the storm, its form fading into the swirling wind. The gorge grew silent, the whispers dissipating as the storm began to calm. Torian lowered his blade, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Skarn limped over to him, its golden eyes meeting his with quiet determination. "We're not done yet," Torian said softly, placing a hand on the beast's shoulder. The ember within him pulsed steadily, its warmth a reminder of the battle still to come. "But we'll face whatever comes next. Together." They pressed onward, the storm fading behind them as the path ahead stretched toward the horizon. Malvorn's fortress loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the turbulent sky. The final confrontation drew closer, and Torian's resolve burned brighter than ever. Chapter 28. The veil of shadows, the air was dense, thickened by the remnants of energy left in the wake of the storm. Torian and Skarn pressed onward through the treacherous landscape, their path flanked by blackened rock formations that jutted out like skeletal remains. The faint glow of fading runes on Torian's blade reflected the slow, determined flicker of the ember in his chest. Above them, the sky churned, a tempest of swirling gray and violet clouds that cast an ominous hue over the terrain. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the valley like a low growl, and the faint scent of charred earth hung heavy in the air. Every step they took was met with the eerie silence of the land, a quiet so profound it gnawed at Torian's nerves. He glanced at Skarn, whose iron-like form moved fluidly despite its wear. The beast's golden eyes scanned the horizon, flickering briefly toward the jagged edges of the canyon ahead. "That labyrinth feels like it's still trying to hold us back," Torian muttered. He reached out and rested his palm against Skarn's broad shoulder, drawing steadiness from the creature's presence. "But we're past it. Whatever's waiting up ahead, Malvorn's reach his tricks. We've dealt with worse." The words hung in the air as much for his own reassurance as they were meant for Skarn. His companion rumbled softly in response, the beast's deep growl vibrating through its chest. As they approached the canyon's entrance, Torian noticed a faint shimmer of shadowy tendrils weaving between the jagged stone. The air felt colder here, the stillness heavier. A sense of foreboding gripped him as the tendrils coalesced into shapes, humanoid figures tall and thin, their bodies composed of flowing darkness. Torian slowed, his blade already pulsing faintly in his hand. "Skarn," he murmured, his voice low, "stay close." The shadowy forms remained still, their glowing violet eyes fixated on the intruders. Torian counted 6 of them, each motionless, like specters frozen in time. Their presence radiated malice, but they didn't attack. Yet, "What do you want?" Torian called, his voice firm. One figure stepped forward. Its movements were smooth and deliberate, as though it floated rather than walked. When it spoke, its voice was a cacophony of whispers, layered and unsettling. "You enter the veil unbidden," the figure said, its head tilting unnaturally. "You trespass where only the Shadowborn tread." "Why?" Torian tightened his grip on his blade. "I'm here for Malvorn," he said plainly. "If you're standing in my way, then I'll cut through you." The figures didn't respond immediately. Then the lead specter chuckled, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. "You are bold," it said, "but boldness cannot save you. The shadows in this canyon hunger for life. They will strip you bare." With a sudden, fluid motion, the specters advanced, their bodies blurred, transforming into streams of shadow that spiraled toward Torian and Skarn like living arrows. Torian's blade ignited, the fiery veins glowing brighter as he slashed through the first tendril. The impact sent a burst of searing light rippling outward, forcing the shadows to recoil. Skarn roared, leaping at another specter with claws extended. The beast's powerful strike shredded its target, the shadowy form dissipating into dark mist. The remaining specters swirled around them in a chaotic dance, their forms shifting between humanoid and amorphous as they attacked. Torian focused on the ember in his chest, drawing strength from its steady rhythm as he moved with precision. His blade cut through the darkness like a beacon, each strike disrupting the shadow's cohesion. One specter lashed out, its tendrils wrapping around Torian's leg and yanking him off balance. He grunted as he hit the ground, the cold tendrils tightening around him. Skarn lunged, its claws severing the shadowy bonds and freeing Torian. "Thanks, buddy," Torian said, scrambling to his feet. The battle intensified as the specters grew more aggressive, their movements faster and more erratic. But Torian and Skarn fought with unwavering determination. Together, they cut down the last of the shadowy figures, the battlefield falling silent once more. Torian exhaled heavily, his breath visible in the frigid air. The ember within him pulsed softly, its warmth spreading through his body and steadying his resolve. "They weren't protecting anything," he said, glancing at Skarn. "That felt more like a test." The beast huffed in agreement, its golden eyes scanning the now-empty canyon. Torian sheathed his blade, the fiery veins along its surface dimming as they pressed forward. The canyon narrowed as they ventured deeper, the walls closing in until the path became little more than a jagged corridor. Shadows still clung to the rock, their presence less tangible but no less unsettling. Torian kept his hand near the hilt of his blade, his senses alert. After what felt like hours of trudging through the oppressive terrain, they emerged into a wide clearing. At its center stood a massive obelisk of black stone, its surface etched with glowing runes that pulsed faintly. The ground around the obelisk was littered with fragments of bone and shattered metal, remnants of battles long past. Torian approached cautiously, the ember in his chest flaring as he drew closer. The obelisk radiated a cold energy that sent shivers down his spine. Skarn growled low, its stance tense as it followed. "This isn't just another monument," Torian said, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the stone surface. The runes flared brightly, and the air around them shifted. The clearing darkened as the shadows coalesced into a single, massive form. A towering figure emerged, its body composed of swirling darkness and jagged edges. Its eyes glowed violet, and its voice rumbled like thunder. "You seek to challenge the Shadow Lord," the figure said, its tone filled with disdain. "But you are unworthy." Torian drew his blade, the fiery veins flaring brightly. "We'll see about that." The shadowy titan let out a deafening roar, its massive arms lashing out with tendrils of darkness. Torian dodged the first strike, rolling to the side as the tendrils smashed into the ground. Skarn charged forward, leaping onto the titan's arm and tearing at it with claws and teeth. The beast's attack distracted the titan long enough for Torian to strike. He channeled the ember's energy into his blade, the fiery veins glowing with intense light as he slashed at the creature's legs. The shadows hissed and recoiled, the titan staggering slightly. But the titan was far from defeated. It slammed its massive fist into the ground, sending a shockwave rippling outward. Torian and Skarn were thrown back, the force of the impact rattling their bones. The fight continued in a blur of motion. Torian moved with precision, his strikes aimed at the titan's core. Each slash of his blade sent bursts of fiery energy into the creature, disrupting its shadowy form. Skarn fought alongside him, its claws and teeth relentless as it tore through the titan's defenses. Finally, with one last powerful strike, Torian drove his blade into the titan's chest. The fiery energy surged into its core, the shadows writhing and twisting before exploding outward in a burst of light. The clearing fell silent once more, the obelisk's glow fading as the titan's form dissolved into nothingness. Torian staggered, exhaustion threatening to overtake him. Skarn limped to his side, its golden eyes watching him closely. "We're still standing," Torian said, his voice steady despite his weariness. He placed a hand on Skarn's shoulder, drawing strength from the beast's unwavering presence. "And we're not stopping now." As they left the clearing, the canyon began to open up, the oppressive shadows giving way to a faint light on the horizon. Torian felt the ember in his chest burn brighter, its warmth a steady reminder of the strength they carried within. The road ahead was still treacherous, but they pressed on, their resolve unshaken. Each step brought them closer to the storm's heart and to Malvorn. Chapter 29. The shadowed vanguard the storm behind them had dissipated into a heavy, eerie calm. The ground ahead of Torian and Skarn was barren, cracked like a shattered mirror, with deep fissures emitting faint, sulfuric heat. Above, the sky was a slate of swirling grays and blacks, with no sun to be seen. The oppressive quiet of the Veil of Shadows felt heavier than the storm's fury had been. Torian adjusted his grip on his blade, the fiery veins along its surface pulsing faintly. The ember in his chest burned with a steady rhythm, a comforting warmth against the chill that had settled into the air. Skarn stalked ahead, its iron-like body crouched low, golden eyes scanning for threats. The beast's movements were cautious but deliberate, claws scraping faintly against the fractured ground. "Something doesn't feel right," Torian muttered, his voice low. The silence of the veil pressed against his ears like a thick fog, amplifying the sound of every footstep. Skarn growled softly, its ears flattening against its head as it sniffed the air. The beast stopped suddenly, its entire body tensing as it let out a low, warning rumble. Torian froze, gripping his blade tightly. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the source of Skarn's unease. The fissures glowed faintly, the heat rising in shimmering waves that distorted the landscape. Beyond the distortion, shapes began to form, shadowy figures emerging from the cracks in the earth. The wraithbound. They were twisted, humanoid shapes made of dark energy, their forms crackling with arcs of purple lightning. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, and in their hands they clutched jagged, rusted weapons that hummed with malevolent energy. "They're testing us again," Torian said under his breath, stepping forward to position himself between the wraithbound and Skarn. "But we've passed every test so far." The wraithbound moved in unison, their steps silent as they advanced. The nearest one raised its weapon, a crude, serrated blade, and lunged. Torian met the strike head-on, his own blade flashing as it deflected the attack. Sparks flew, the fiery veins along his weapon clashing against the crackling lightning of the wraithbound sword. Skarn roared, leaping at a pair of the creatures with claws extended. The beast's powerful strikes tore through their shadowy forms, sending arcs of energy splintering into the air. But as the wraithbound fell, more emerged from the fissures, their numbers seemingly endless. Torian gritted his teeth, ducking beneath another swing and driving his blade into the chest of his attacker. The fiery energy surged, burning through the creature's form and reducing it to ash. He turned just in time to block another strike, the force of the blow sending vibrations up his arm. "They're trying to wear us down," Torian called to Skarn. The beast let out a defiant roar, swiping another wraithbound into the fissures with a powerful strike of its tail. The air grew heavier, the oppressive energy of the veil pressing down on them. Torian felt the ember within him flare, its warmth cutting through the fatigue that had begun to creep into his limbs. He focused on the rhythm of its pulse, letting it guide his movements as he struck down another attacker. Then the ground trembled, the fissures widened, and from the largest crack emerged a massive, hulking figure. It was unlike the smaller wraithbound. This one was fully armored, its blackened plate adorned with glowing runes that pulsed in time with the fissure's light. In its hands, it carried a colossal warhammer, the weapon crackling with dark energy. The wraithbound vanguard. Torian took a step back, his blade raised defensively. "That's new," he muttered, glancing at Skarn. The vanguard let out a guttural roar, the sound reverberating through the veil. It raised its warhammer and brought it crashing down, the impact sending shockwaves rippling through the ground. Torian barely managed to leap out of the way, the fissures beneath him splitting wider as chunks of rock crumbled into the depths. "Keep moving," Torian shouted, his voice sharp. He charged forward, his blade glowing brighter as he channeled the ember's energy. The vanguard swung its hammer again, but Torian sidestepped the blow, the weapon slamming into the ground with enough force to send debris flying. Skarn leapt at the vanguard from the side, its claws raking across the creature's armored flank. The strike left deep gouges in the metal, but the vanguard seemed unfazed. It turned, swinging its hammer in a wide arc that sent Skarn tumbling to the ground. "Skarn," Torian called out, his chest tightening. The beast growled, struggling to rise, its golden eyes blazing with determination. The vanguard advanced on Skarn, its hammer raised for a killing blow. Torian sprinted forward, his blade flaring as he struck at the creature's exposed back. The fiery veins cut deep into the vanguard's armor, sparks flying as the energy surged into its core. The vanguard let out a roar of pain, stumbling forward and dropping its hammer. It turned to face Torian, its hollow eyes blazing with fury. Torian held his ground, his blade steady as he prepared for the next strike. The vanguard lunged, its massive fist swinging in a flurry of powerful blows. Torian dodged and parried, each impact sending shockwaves through his arms. The ember within him burned hotter, its energy fueling his movements as he countered with precise, deliberate strikes. Skarn rejoined the fight, leaping onto the vanguard's back and sinking its claws into the gaps in the creature's armor. The beast's powerful strikes tore through the vanguard's defenses, exposing the glowing runes beneath its plating. "Now!" Torian shouted, seeing the opening. He channeled all his energy into his blade, the fiery veins glowing with an intense light. With a powerful strike, he drove the weapon into the vanguard's chest, the energy surging into its core. The vanguard let out a deafening roar, its body shuddering as cracks spread across its armor. The glowing runes flared brightly before shattering, the creature collapsing into a heap of smoldering metal. The battlefield grew still, the remaining wraithbound dissipating into the air as their leader fell. Torian lowered his blade, his chest heaving as exhaustion set in. Skarn limped over to him, its body battered but unbroken. "We're still standing," Torian said softly, placing a hand on Skarn's head. The beast let out a low rumble of approval, its golden eyes meeting his. The fissures began to close, the oppressive energy of the veil receding. Torian felt the ember within him burn more steadily, its warmth a reminder of the strength they had forged together. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the silhouette of a massive fortress loomed in the distance. Its spires pierced the storm-laden sky, and its walls seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent glow. "That's our next stop," Torian said, his voice steady. "Malvorn's fortress." With Skarn at his side, he pressed forward, leaving the veil of shadows behind. The final leg of their journey awaited, and with it, the confrontation that would decide the fate of everything they had fought for. Chapter 30. The Forsaken Keep. The jagged silhouette of Malvorn's Forsaken Keep rose on the horizon, a fortress that seemed less built than born from the surrounding desolation. Its walls, made of blackened stone, jutted skyward in cruel angles, while massive spires clawed at the storm-heavy skies above. Around it, a swirling mist hung low to the ground, carrying whispers that seemed to beckon or warn. Torian couldn't tell which. As they approached, the terrain shifted from the cracked, barren earth to a jagged, uneven field strewn with broken weapons and ancient bones. The air was thick with the scent of rot and ozone, and every step felt heavier, as though the land itself resisted their intrusion. Skarn walked beside Torian, its iron-like frame battered but unyielding. The beast's golden eyes remained fixed on the fortress ahead, its growls low and steady. Torian could feel the ember within his chest pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, the fiery warmth steadying him as he gripped his blade. "This is it," Torian said softly. His voice was calm, but his jaw tightened as he took in the fortress's imposing presence. "Malvorn's trying to break us with every step. We can't let him." Skarn growled in agreement, nudging Torian's side with its massive head. Together, they pressed on. The gates of the Forsaken Keep were monstrous. 2 slabs of obsidian engraved with ancient, glowing runes. As they neared, the runes began to flare and the air grew colder. Torian slowed, scanning the area for any signs of movement, but the silence was suffocating. He reached out cautiously, placing a hand on the cold surface of the gate. Instantly, the runes ignited in a burst of pale blue light. A voice, deep and hollow, echoed from the walls around them. None who enter leave unbroken. Turn back or be consumed. Torian's grip on his blade tightened. We've come too far to stop now, he said, his voice firm. The gates groaned as they began to creak open, revealing a courtyard bathed in dim, unnatural light. The walls of the keep loomed high, lined with jagged spikes, while ancient statues of armored warriors stood sentinel at uneven intervals. Each statue was worn and weathered, but their empty eyes seemed to follow Torian and Skarn as they stepped inside. As the gates closed behind them with a deafening clang, the air grew still. Torian's every breath felt loud in the oppressive silence. Then came the sound, soft at first like a faint tapping, but growing steadily louder. It was coming from all around them. The statues began to move. The fallen guardians were the remnants of Malvorn's long-dead soldiers, cursed to serve for eternity. Their stone forms cracked and groaned as they came to life, the glow of their hollow eyes burning with malicious intent. Each one hefted a massive, rusted weapon, a mix of swords, axes, and maces, and their movements, though slow, were deliberate and unyielding. Torian raised his blade as the first guardian advanced, its stone sword crashing down with a force that sent cracks spreading across the ground. He sidestepped the blow, his fiery blade slashing upward and carving a glowing scar through the guardian's chest. The creature let out a low, guttural groan as it crumbled into a pile of stone and ash. "They're testing us," Torian muttered. His fiery blade flared as 2 more guardians lumbered toward him. "But we don't break." Skarn roared, leaping onto one of the stone figures and sinking its claws into the guardian's face. The beast's weight dragged the statue down, and with a ferocious swipe, Skarn shattered its chest, scattering chunks of stone across the courtyard. The guardians closed in from all sides, their weapons swinging with brutal force. Torian moved fluidly, his strikes precise and calculated. Each blow from his blade burned brighter, the ember's energy coursing through him as he felled one guardian after another. Skarn fought at his side, the beast's roars echoing through the courtyard as it tore through the enemies with relentless ferocity. Despite their strength, the numbers were overwhelming. For every guardian they destroyed, another seemed to rise from the ground, their forms glowing faintly as they reassembled. Torian's breathing grew heavier, the constant strain taking its toll. "We can't keep this up," he said, slashing through another guardian. He glanced at Skarn, who was limping slightly but still fighting with unrelenting fury. Then Torian noticed something, a faint glow in the center of the courtyard. It came from a cracked stone altar, its surface etched with the same runes that adorned the gates. The energy emanating from it pulsed in rhythm with the guardians' movements. The altar, Torian realized, it's keeping them alive. He turned to Skarn. "Hold them off. I'll take care of this." The beast let out a defiant roar, leaping into the fray to draw the guardians' attention. Torian sprinted toward the altar, his blade glowing brighter as he focused the ember's energy. The ground trembled beneath him as the remaining guardians closed in, their stone forms groaning with every step. Reaching the altar, Torian placed a hand on its surface. The runes flared, and a surge of dark energy pulsed through him, cold and suffocating. He gritted his teeth, summoning the ember's warmth to counter the oppressive force. Channeling the combined power of fire, shadow, and light, he raised his blade and drove it into the center of the altar. The effect was immediate. The runes shattered, their glow extinguished as a wave of fiery energy radiated outward. The guardians froze in place, their forms cracking and crumbling as the curse that bound them was broken. Within moments, the courtyard was silent once more, the stone remains of the fallen scattered across the ground. Torian collapsed to one knee, his chest heaving as exhaustion set in. Skarn limped over to him, its body battered but still standing. Torian placed a hand on the beast's shoulder, drawing strength from its unyielding presence. "We're still here," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "And we're not stopping now." At the far end of the courtyard, a massive door began to creak open, revealing a spiraling staircase carved into the obsidian walls. The faint glow of torches lit the path upward, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. Torian rose slowly, gripping his blade tightly. "The real fight is ahead," he said, glancing at Skarn. The beast growled in agreement, its golden eyes fixed on the path before them. They began the climb, each step taking them deeper into the heart of Malvorn's fortress. The air grew colder, the oppressive energy of the keep pressing down on them with every turn of the staircase. Torian could feel the ember within him burning brighter, its warmth steadying him as he pressed on. At the top of the staircase, they emerged into a massive chamber filled with swirling shadows. At its center stood a towering figure, its form cloaked in darkness and its eyes glowing with a deep, crimson light. The warden of the keep. "You've come far, Torian," the warden said, its voice resonating with a hollow echo. "But this is where your journey ends." Torian raised his blade, the fiery veins flaring brightly. "I've heard that before," he said, his voice steady. "Let's see if you can back it up." The shadows surged, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Chapter 31. The Abyssal Ascent to clash with the Warden of the Keep left Torian and Skarn battered but victorious. The defeated Guardian's shadowy form had disintegrated, leaving behind a faint pulse of energy that seemed to ripple outward, shattering the suffocating silence that had dominated the Forsaken Keep. The chamber began to tremble, and cracks formed along its walls as if the structure itself sought to purge the intruders. Torian and Skarn raced down the spiraling staircase as the keep began to collapse. The oppressive air of the fortress now carried a different energy, a rising urgency, a warning to leave. Skarn bounded ahead, its claws finding purchase on the slick obsidian steps, while Torian gripped the wall for balance. Dust and debris rained down around them, the once imposing keep crumbling into ruin. When they burst through the gates into the courtyard, the mist that had shrouded the fortress began to recede, revealing a sky heavy with bruised clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the faint outline of the abyss stretched across the horizon. They didn't pause to look back as the Forsaken Keep collapsed entirely, its jagged spires sinking into the earth. Torian rested his hands on his knees, catching his breath. Skarn stood beside him, its massive chest heaving. The ember in Torian's chest pulsed, steady and resolute, pushing away the weariness creeping into his limbs. "That's one more piece of Malvorn's dominion gone," Torian said, his voice hoarse. "But the hardest part is still ahead." He looked toward the abyss, its unnatural glow casting a sickly green light on the horizon. The ground seemed to ripple as though alive, and the storm clouds above churned with anticipation. This was no ordinary destination. It was the heart of Malvorn's power. Every instinct told Torian to turn back, but the ember within him burned with defiance. The journey to the abyss was marked by silence. The land became more treacherous with every step, the cracked earth giving way to jagged fissures and sharp, obsidian outcroppings. The air grew colder, carrying a faint hum that vibrated in Torian's chest. It wasn't natural. It was as if the abyss itself was alive, breathing, watching. Skarn moved cautiously, its golden eyes scanning the shadows that stretched long and deep across the landscape. Torian kept his blade at the ready, its fiery veins casting a faint glow that pushed back the darkness. As they crested a ridge, the full scope of the abyss came into view. It was a massive rift in the earth, its edges lined with jagged spires of black stone. The chasm pulsed with an eerie green light, and shadows writhed within its depths like restless spirits. A narrow bridge of bone and stone stretched across the void, its surface slick with condensation that shimmered faintly. "This is it," Torian said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the abyss. "No turning back now." Skarn growled softly, stepping closer to his side. Together, they descended toward the bridge, the oppressive energy of the abyss growing stronger with every step. Torian could feel the ember within him burning brighter, its warmth a shield against the cold that seemed to seep into his very bones. When they reached the bridge, the hum intensified, becoming a low, resonant vibration that made the air ripple. Torian hesitated, his gaze scanning the void below. The shadows within the chasm seemed to rise and fall like waves, their movements hypnotic and menacing. Skarn let out a low growl, its body tensed. Torian followed the beast's gaze and saw them, figures emerging from the darkness at the far end of the bridge. They were humanoid, but their forms were twisted and grotesque, their limbs elongated and their movements jerky. Their hollow eyes glowed with the same green light as the abyss. The abyssal sentinels. Torian raised his blade, the fiery veins flaring in response to the encroaching threat. The sentinels moved as one, their jagged weapons scraping against the bone-like surface of the bridge. The hum of the abyss grew louder, the air vibrating with the promise of violence. "They're not going to let us cross without a fight," Torian muttered, shifting into a defensive stance. "Fine by me." The first sentinel lunged, its movements unnaturally fast. Torian sidestepped the strike, his blade flashing as he countered. The fiery energy seared through the creature's chest. But instead of falling, the sentinel dissolved into shadow and reformed, its hollow eyes blazing brighter. "They can reform," Torian realized, his voice tight. "Great." Skarn leapt into the fray, its claws raking through the nearest sentinel. The beast's attack tore the creature apart, but like the first, it reassembled within moments, its form more twisted and aggressive than before. Torian gritted his teeth, focusing on the ember within him. The warmth spread through his limbs, steadying his movements as he unleashed a flurry of strikes. His blade burned brighter with each swing, the fiery veins cutting through the sentinels and dispersing their shadowy forms. "They're connected to the abyss," Torian said, dodging another strike. "We need to sever that connection." Skarn growled in agreement, its golden eyes locking on the far end of the bridge. Torian followed the beast's gaze and saw it, a massive crystal embedded in the stone, pulsing with the same green light as the abyss. The sentinels seemed to draw their power from it, their movements synchronized with its rhythmic glow. "That's the source," Torian said, determination hardening his voice. "We have to destroy it." The fight became a desperate push toward the crystal. The sentinels grew more aggressive with every step, their attacks coming faster and more coordinated. Torian and Skarn fought side by side, their movements honed and precise. The ember's energy burned hotter, fueling Torian's strikes as he cut through the relentless onslaught. When they reached the crystal, the hum of the abyss reached a deafening pitch. Torian could feel the energy radiating from it, cold and overwhelming. He raised his blade, channeling the full power of the ember, shadow, and light into a single strike. "Now!" he shouted, bringing the blade down with all his strength. The fiery energy surged into the crystal, shattering its surface and sending cracks spiraling outward. The sentinels let out an otherworldly wail, their forms dissolving into wisps of shadow that were pulled back into the abyss. The crystal exploded in a burst of green light, the force of the blast sending Torian and Skarn sprawling. When the light faded, the bridge was silent, and the oppressive energy of the abyss had diminished. Torian rose slowly, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Skarn limped over to him, its golden eyes meeting his with quiet resolve. "We're still standing," Torian said softly, placing a hand on the beast's shoulder. "That's what matters." They turned toward the far end of the bridge, where a narrow path wound upward toward a towering structure on the horizon. It was the entrance to Malvorn's domain, the final stretch of their journey. Torian tightened his grip on his blade, the ember within him burning brighter than ever. "Let's finish this," he said. With Skarn at his side, he stepped onto the path, the shadow of Malvorn's citadel looming ahead. Chapter 32. The veil of shadows, the faint green glow of the jagged wasteland, painted the landscape in hues of dread and decay. Each step that Torian and Skarn took seemed to draw the land itself into motion. Shadows stretched unnaturally, slithering like living things retreating from the dim light of Torian's blade. He gripped it tightly, its fiery veins flickering steadily, a constant reminder of the ember's power. Torian glanced at Skarn, whose golden eyes surveyed the horizon with sharp precision. The beast's iron-like body bore scars from their battles, but its movements remained unyielding, purposeful. Torian spoke, his voice a mix of resolve and weariness. "Does this place feel alive to you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Skarn growled low, its sharp ears twitching at the slightest sound. The beast turned its head to meet his gaze, and though it said nothing, the bond between them carried its meaning clearly. Stay ready. Ahead of them, the path narrowed, a corridor of jagged rock walls that climbed sharply into the haze of greenish mist. The oppressive air carried a faint scent of sulfur, and the wind murmured as if whispering secrets they were not meant to hear. Torian's thoughts drifted to his companions, the allies he had fought beside and left behind during the trials. Each had brought something to the battle against Malvorn, and yet here he stood alone with Skarn. The ember within him burned brighter at the thought, a silent promise not to let their sacrifices go to waste. A voice broke the silence, cold and laced with venom. "You've come far, boy, but the flame you carry flickers weaker with every step." Torian's blade ignited in response as his head snapped up. From the mist ahead emerged Karnas, his shadow stalker frame sleek and predatory. His jagged smile and glowing eyes carried an unsettling confidence. His voice was a low rumble, tinged with cruel amusement. "Still clinging to that ember? How noble! How foolish!" Torian's grip tightened. "You're still here? I thought you'd learned your lesson last time." Karnas chuckled, circling him like a predator stalking prey. "Oh, I learned plenty. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But it won't matter. Not here." He gestured toward the shadowed landscape. "This place belongs to Malvorn. And here, even your precious ember won't save you." Skarn let out a low growl, stepping forward with claws flexing, but Torian held up a hand to stop him. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Malvorn's power is failing, Karnas. You can feel it, can't you? That's why you're here, stalling. He's afraid." Karnas's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl. He crouched low, his limbs elongating unnaturally as shadows coiled around his body like armor. "You should worry less about Malvorn and more about surviving me." With a guttural hiss, Karnas launched forward, his claws slicing through the air. Torian raised his blade, its fiery light clashing against Karnas's shadowy form. Sparks flew as their weapons met, the force of the impact sending a shock wave through the narrow corridor. Karnas moved with terrifying speed, his strikes unpredictable and relentless. He taunted as he fought, his voice a constant sneer. "You think this makes you strong? That ember is nothing but a spark in the void." Torian parried a blow and countered with a precise strike, the ember's power surging through his blade. The fiery veins flared, and Karnas recoiled as the light seared his shadowy armor. "It's not just the ember," Torian said, his voice steady. "It's everything I've fought for, everything I've lost." Karnas snarled, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Spare me your righteous drivel." Skarn leapt into the fray, its powerful claws tearing at Karnas's side. The shadow stalker howled, twisting free and delivering a vicious backhand that sent the beast skidding across the ground. But Skarn recovered quickly, circling back with a roar that shook the rocks around them. The battle raged in a blur of motion and energy. Torian's blade clashed against Karnas's claws again and again, the ember's light driving back the shadows that threatened to engulf him. But Karnas was relentless, his attacks fueled by a twisted resolve. "You think you're a hero?" Karnas spat, his voice laced with venom. "You're just another fool, another pawn in Malvorn's game." Torian's eyes burned with determination as he stepped into his next strike, his blade cutting through Karnas's defenses. The Shadow Stalker staggered, his form flickering like a flame in the wind. "I'm no pawn," Torian said, his voice sharp, "and you're just another obstacle." Summoning the full strength of the Ember, Torian unleashed a powerful blast of fiery energy. It collided with Karnas, engulfing him in searing light. The Shadow Stalker let out a final, piercing scream as his form dissolved into smoke, the shadows retreating into the mist. The corridor grew quiet, the oppressive energy lifting slightly. Torian lowered his blade, his chest heaving as he turned to Skarn. The beast limped over to him, its golden eyes filled with quiet pride. "We're getting closer," Torian said softly, his voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into his body. Skarn growled in agreement, its gaze fixed on the path ahead. As they continued, the green mist began to thin, revealing the outline of Malvorn's citadel in the distance. It loomed like a jagged wound against the horizon, its spires reaching toward the storm-laden sky. The ember within Torian flared brighter, its warmth steadying him as he prepared for the final confrontation. The path grew steeper, the air colder, but Torian's resolve remained unshaken. Malvorn's reign was nearing its end, and no shadow would stop him from finishing what he had started. Chapter 33. The shadow of Malvorn, the jagged outline of Malvorn's citadel, loomed larger with every step Torian and Skarn took. Its obsidian towers twisted like thorns piercing the sky, their edges illuminated by the occasional flicker of distant lightning. A suffocating air surrounded the structure, its weight pressing down on Torian's chest, making every breath feel like a battle. The gates of the citadel stood tall and foreboding, carved from black stone etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the storm's light. The ground leading up to them was littered with the remnants of past battles, shattered bones, rusted weapons, and the charred remains of armor, all half buried in the ash-like soil. The whispering wind carried faint echoes of voices, pleas for mercy, cries of defiance, and the laughter of something cruel. Torian tightened his grip on his blade, the fiery veins along its surface flaring briefly. Skarn growled low, its golden eyes fixed on the gates as if daring them to move. "This is it," Torian muttered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Malvorn's last line of defense. Skarn let out a sharp, affirming growl, stepping forward. The beast's powerful frame was tense, its claws scraping the ground in anticipation. As if sensing their approach, the gates groaned and slowly began to open. The sound was deafening, a deep rumble that echoed across the barren landscape. Beyond the gates lay a massive, empty courtyard bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow. Shadows clung to the edges of the space, riding like living things waiting for a command. Torian and Skarn stepped inside, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The ember in Torian's chest burned hotter, its warmth fighting against the cold that seemed to radiate from the very walls of the citadel. A voice broke the silence, low and resonant, carrying an unnatural weight. "So, the boy with the ember finally arrives." Torian froze, his blade instinctively rising. From the far end of the courtyard, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and clad in jagged black armor that seemed to absorb the faint light around it. Crimson eyes burned beneath the horn helm, staring directly at Torian. It wasn't Malvorn, but one of his generals. The figure stepped forward, dragging a massive greatsword behind it. Sparks flew as the blade scraped against the stone. Its voice was as cold as the void. "You've caused quite the stir, boy. Malvorn grows." Impatient, Torian's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "Then let's not waste time. If you're here to stop me, I suggest you try." The general let out a harsh laugh, raising its greatsword. Bold words for someone so outmatched. "But I'll admit, Your persistence intrigues me. Skarn snarled, stepping in front of Torian with its claws flexed. The general tilted its head, as if studying the beast. Ah, the loyal companion. How touching. Let's see how well you fight together. With a deafening roar, the general charged. The ground trembled beneath its massive frame, and the greatsword swung in a wide arc, the force of the blow splitting the stone where Torian had stood moments before. He rolled to the side, his blade flashing as he countered with a precise strike. The fiery veins along its surface flared brightly as it clashed against the general's armor. The last guardian lunged at him, its spectral form glowing brightly. Torian met its charge heat-in, his blade colliding with the figure in a brilliant clash of light and energy. The guardian dissolved, its remnants carried away by the wind. The vortex calmed, and the path ahead opened once more. Torian placed a hand on Skarn's shoulder, drawing strength from the beast's unwavering presence. "We're not stopping," he said. "Not now." The second ascent. The bridge of shadows, the next